Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the last Cyber Phenomena Roundtable for 2025. Today's subject is Trust Through Transparency, Winning and Keeping Stakeholder Trust. I'm Mike Sheehan, and I'm a board member of ISC2 of Eastern Mass, and I organize this roundtable series along with Managing Director of Phenomenati, Scott Foote. Once again, we have a great panel today. Neil Lucky, Steve Foote, Bill Bowman, and our facilitator of the panel for today, Scott Foote. Nia is a cybersecurity leader specializing in GRC, threat intelligence, risk mitigation, and cloud security. As a lead of governance and monitoring at AT&T, she specializes in creating innovative solutions aimed at technology risk and holistic risk reduction. Nia is a co-author of the CISO Playbook, a TEDx speaker, and excels at aligning cybersecurity GRC needs with business goals by fostering strong security culture. Steve Foote is a software engineering executive and virtual CTO with expertise across finance, healthcare, intelligence, and law enforcement. He leads secure agile software factory development using DevSecOps, cloud, and AI. A former Oracle engineer and co-founder of this distributed systems company, Steve holds many patents, has authored over 1,000 publications, and serves as an expert witness and board member. Bill Bowman is an operating partner and CISO at the private equity firm Welsh Carlson. Bill helps the portfolio companies with security risk, compliance, privacy, and counter-fraud activities. He has publicly stated that data privacy is his love language. Founding president of ISC2 Eastern Mass, and previously served as a CISO at Emburse, Ed Software, and also as Chief Security Officer at Zoom Info. Scott Foote is Managing Director of Phenomenati, serving as the CISO, the DPO, CIRO, and Chief AI Officer. With 35 years in cybersecurity leadership, he has led teams from 10 to 1,000 and driven major digital transformations. Scott authored The Risk Formula and Cyber Entropy, and frequently advises boards, nonprofits, and executives on risk and security strategy. We have a lot of material to cover today. If you have any questions, if you can put them in chat, and if we don't get to them, we can follow up with you. So with all that being said, please join me in welcoming today's facilitator, Scott Foote. Scott, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to be sharing some slides, but I'm going to keep switching away from that so we can see all of our panelists in our discussion. So bear with me as I go back and forth there. Let me just kick it off by saying this concept of trust through transparency, it's been around for a long time. I talk about it a lot, whether we're in the C-suite or in the boardroom. When we say, look, you've got to establish a program, then you've got to go and do external audits. You need third-party certifications, et cetera, and they all look at me and say, why do we need the expense? And I said, because you can't simply say, trust me. You've got to prove it, right? You need to provide evidence, and it needs to be objective. And that's getting harder and harder. Many people will accept that premise, and they will just go the next step and say, all right, well, let's quickly go do a SOC 2 audit, or let's quickly get a couple of ISO certifications in place. Good start, but I believe today that's grossly insufficient. Trust is something that needs to continuously be tended. It's not just trust in the company, it needs to be trust in the individual and the systems. So I thought I'd ask these folks who all have very strong opinions about how do we build and maintain trust to weigh in on it. At a very high level, if we take it and break it down, I would say there's three things I'd like to talk about, but I don't want to constrain us, guys. So, I mean, feel free, like, the sky's the limit here. But the first is, what do we do ourselves as an organization to provide assurance? Whether it's through audits or other types of mechanisms, what do we do to gain trust from our stakeholders? Second topic is, we can no longer treat all of our ecosystem suppliers as a black box. How do we go and extract trust from them? How do we go and demand that they prove that they have earned our trust? The third piece is where I really want to open up the aperture and say, with AI today, AI systems, we're all providers and consumers in some way, shape, or form in that ecosystem. And if you look at things like the European AI Act, we're all being held responsible for transparency and explainability. So how do we deal with that? How do we unfold something that is at least one or even two orders of magnitude more complex than your basic systems like, CRM, for example, or HR platforms? So that's what I'd really like to get into. And again, I don't want to constrain us in terms of upwardly facing, looking at stakeholders, down looking at our vendors, and really get into AI. I want to open it up. So before we dive into these, what I want to do is put Nia on the spot. Nia, you've done an excellent YouTube video. I know it's been very popular. I've watched it a few times where you talk about trust in the world, even just as an individual consumer. How do we trust in our service providers? And then I know you advise your clients on how they achieve that trust, but also all of the things they need to do to prove the trust in their own supplier ecosystem. So, Nia, can you kick it off and just give us your broad perspective on trust in this role of advising people, whether it's in a CISO capacity or advising boards?
Absolutely, Scott. So it really started in May when I was asked to create an innovative idea. So that's what TED is all about, and kind of creating and packaging terms we know, but from a totally different perspective. And so for me, what I'm working on currently is the trust protocol, which takes three very common terms in cybersecurity where we all live across every area of business and organization. Some people may be more familiar than others, but it's taking the concepts of authentication, encryption, and resilience and almost flipping it on its head and asking leaders to look at it from a behavioral perspective. And I'm not asking leaders to assess their teams. The challenge to leaders and the call to action is assess yourself first. When we're talking about authentication, are you showing up authentically? What does that look like for you? Have you defined that? Are you consistent in that practice? Do you yourself bring that cadence, that heartbeat, that authenticity to the table every day in a way that helps foster trust? Because that's what's needed. Second to that is encryption, which, as we know, is more of like that trusted tunnel where data transfers. What does that look like between Nia and Scott, Nia and Bill, Nia and Mike, the four of us? Can I trust that what I'm communicating today is not going to be conflated, twisted, taken out of context tomorrow, like, and almost confuse the intent of the message, right? That's the goal of encryption. And again, to the challenge with authentication, are you doing that with a regular rate of consistency? If I actually asked you to set a KPI to how often you're providing that for your teams, your organizations across business units, can you say with confidence that you are performing in that way? And then third is resilience. And the reason I key in on resilience is because, from my perspective, it takes both authentication and encryption to bolster the resilience of an organization and its ability to bounce back in literal technology. So, when we're embedding this in our actual behaviors and we're encouraging this in our teams, we're actually able to have really difficult conversations that may get passionate, right? We all love what we do and we care deeply because it's based in good intent. Are we able to bounce back? Or do we have turnover? Do we have consistent, persistent friction points of non resolution? And long term, what is that doing to our performance? Right? So, trust is about demonstrating your ability to perform an action repeatedly, right? It's not a one and done. It's definitely not a check the box. Um, and even coming from my time at Tampa Bay, I got to listen to Jay Collins give his keynote. And he really hit home, at least for me, when he was saying things like, I am the type of leader that if I say something, it gets done, but I can't fix what I don't know. That requires trust, right? So we have a lot of team members, and even myself included in this, in the last decade, where often we'll go silent. We're not comfortable raising our thoughts or our ideas because in some cultures and some ecosystems, that can cost you your job. Um, I'm more of the mindset of I'd rather know than not know. I don't like blind spots. It's not, something I'm really a fan of, but I am about what does trust look like in 2025? Because as we look beyond, right, the emergence and what's on the horizon and all the buzzwords, it's are we even ready? And if we have stats coming out of the World Economic Forum that are stating that 70% of technology failures aren't caused by bad coding, it's caused by human mistrust and misuse. Can we start thinking about it a little bit differently, transparently, so that we can really get to the crux of the issue instead of dancing around, does this person trust me or not? Right? Your actions are going to tell on you if you trust a person or if you don't trust a person. So let's talk about what that looks like. And then we can maybe span across organization, team, business units, and so on. But it all starts with the core individual, from my perspective.
I think that's outstanding context, Nia. Thank you for laying that out for us, because it truly isn't an exercise in just exchanging information. Yes, I have these controls. Yes, somebody verified them. As you said, it's personal. It comes from leadership, and it's about your continuing behaviors. It isn't just about passing the one audit, which is important, but nowhere near sufficient. It's about your ongoing behavior, and are you reliable? Are you, I think you had said at one point in it's been a while, the TEDx video, I think you talked about, look, resiliency is about planning for failure, right? You
Correct.
need to be prepared. Don't, pull one of these. You're going to wind up in difficult times like we all had earlier this week with AWS. Plan for that. And my trust in you is based upon how you prepare and how you handle those types of difficult situations.
Absolutely. And not just AWS this week, but let's even go back another 5 business days. Deloitte in Australia, right? And we're taking results out of the Copilot LLM and we're passing them off as actual, tangible, paid for to the tune of like $250,000 for a product that is flawed. What's the trust look like? Did we just experience a trust fracture with one of the largest companies in the United States? Like it it really comes down to actions and repetitive actions to me.
And I like to say superficiality is the inverse of trust. When people try to
Mhm.
do it and half-ass it, they pencil whip it, that's the superficiality that eats away at what we try to do every day. And I can see Bill is chomping at the bit to throw in some perspectives here. Bill, your thoughts on this as we're laying the context here and the groundwork, and we'll get into the different pieces of it in a few minutes, but your thoughts.
Yeah, so I love how Scott, you started by pointing up, and looking down, and looking left and looking right, and then Nia very first said, "No, no, no, you have to look right back in the mirror." Absolutely love that context as we just start to think about where our lens is and what are we aiming towards. I always love. I was asked about a year ago as we were looking at, okay, what does 2025 look like for us? And I said, oh, the often forgotten leg of the CIA triad, integrity, is the one area that I think we have to be focused on in 2025. Obviously, we can see deep fakes, we can see a lot of different areas around where integrity is. But then taking that concept of integrity, not only of integrity of data, but integrity of the individual and the individuals who are giving us that information is an area that we absolutely have to be focused on. Our inability to be focused on integrity as security leaders is going to be our downfall. And if we don't have that stuff wrapped up effectively, we really are in a tough spot. For me personally, I take a look at what are some of the roles and people that I see out there, and I literally laugh to myself whenever I see a chief trust officer. With respect, if anybody on the phone call is a chief trust officer, I don't know what credentials you need in order to get that. I feel like it's a marketing term.
Polygraph. Yeah.
Failing your polygraph based on your title is not a good day one piece for your job. I think we really have to be figuring, okay, how do we as individuals build that trust with other people? And if I'm forcing trust or forcing an integrity piece on you, it's never going to go well. So that's the area that where I'm coming from for the discussion today.
Fantastic. Stephen, do you have thoughts you want to add before I want to dive in a little bit? And very much what Nia talked about is let's look at what an organization should be doing to look at themselves. But before I dive in, Stephen, do you have more any thoughts you want to add here at the 50,000 foot level?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's 50,000 foot, but I'm going to pull both integrity from Bill and the tech examples and repeatability from Nia. So as a consumer of technology, I can tell you that Microsoft seriously impacted my trust of the corporation when by default they rolled Copilot into Outlook and Office 365, M365. I did a post on LinkedIn about the security breach because before I even know I have an email, Copilot by default was reading my email and taking actions on that. I didn't ask for that. That's low integrity, in my opinion. That's low integrity. Another one, why does NVIDIA need the location of a computer just because you want to install the GPU device driver? Why do they insist on the location of that device? If it's for export reasons, say so. Be transparent. But I fail to understand why NVIDIA, I'm a fan, I hold stock. I fail to understand why NVIDIA insists on knowing the geolocation of the graphics card in desktop equipment and laptops. So it's complex. It's certainly getting worse. It's, the Deloitte example, Nia, great example. I love that example. I think let's revisit that one as we get later into the discussion. We'll focus a little bit more on AI, but I'll kick it back over to you for the time being, Scott.
It's fantastic. And I think, broadly, as we move down to the organization or the individuals within the organization, I think I talk a lot about the CISO having an outcome that they produce or advocate for as trust. But one of the things I say privately in meetings all the time is just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that, I think, Stephen, you made me think of that topic. And I often get blank stares. They're like, no, full steam ahead, let's go. And just because you can doesn't mean you should. So let's do that. Let's talk about how we ourselves internally build trust with external stakeholders, not just customers. Stephen, you make a good point there. But what about investors? What about insurance companies? What about our leadership team? What about our own staff? How do we build that? And I'm trying to find my share button here. There we go. This is Zoom. And can you guys now see, hopefully you guys can see the slides. Now, only one of us is going to be visible, but so let me just set the table and then I'm going to pull back from this again. Trust without evidence is hope. I say that all the time. Trust without evidence is just hope. That is a flawed plan right from the very start. So you need to have the evidence. To Nia's point, it isn't just about show up and throw up in my annual audit. It's about my behavior, which reinforces my own integrity, my company's integrity. That needs to be maintained throughout the year. So it's fundamental that we recognize, and people are constantly bashing SOC 2 audits, and I actually read them, but also, ISO certs, everyone, there's been a wave in the last 3 or 4 years. Everybody's going and saying, that's my foundation. Good. But it's when it's misconstrued as a mark of excellence, that's bad, because it's not. It's the floor, not the ceiling. It's where we get started with. So, let's talk about what are we doing in our own trust programs internally to move away from just, or let's say move beyond, not move away from, but move beyond just the fundamentals of audits, certifications, how we handle our disclosures, and how do we truly establish a trust posture, not just in our trust centers. Like I think I have a slide in here about trust centers. These didn't exist 5 years ago, and now everyone's got them, right? You go to mycompany.com/trust. That's wonderful, because when I'm looking down at those vendors, that's the first place I start. But it's no more than first base. It really requires the continuity of your program and maintaining the integrity and not doing things like Stephen pointed out. Don't train on my data without asking. You didn't get my consent, right? don't publish things that you actually haven't contributed to. If you want to use it as a starting point with like a generative AI type of a platform, okay, that's the future. But you need to go and actually add something to it. Most of all, you need to be the editor of that product. You've got to go confirm what's in that. So let me throw this out to the table. And well, Stephen, let me start with you in terms of thoughts about what you've seen me do. I do most of this for the Phenomenati clients, but talk about the times you and I have been in the room when you have been the virtual CTO and I've been the virtual CISO, and we've worked to gain trust from very large Fortune 100 customers. What's that experience been like? And let me drop the sharing so we can all be back on the screen. Over to you, Stephen.
I'll start with that's usually room clearing when Scott and I are both in the room discussing technologies. Everybody seems to have a phone call to take, an email to read, and whatnot. So very quickly, empties a room. A lot of it is the complexity around the technology today. We spend an inordinate amount of time making concrete that which is very abstract, which, by the way, is one of the reasons why AI is the tail end of this particular discussion, because that's just another order of magnitude of the complexity, if you will. So you have to establish a foundation. And case in point, the SOC 2, there's multiple different categories that you can pursue inside of a SOC 2. And you can establish the scope around, a limited set of the infrastructure for SOC 2 compliance. Establishing the scope and the boundaries is important, but it's all too easy for the entity being audited, in this case, seeking the SOC 2, to define the scope around the frog pond in the backyard rather than the entire acre of land on which the business sits. So it's an oversimplification. It's challenging. It's challenging to establish the level of transparency that the downstream businesses and consumers need out of any corporation or organization. Balancing that with the need to retain sensitive, confidential information about how your business operates. You don't want to give away the algorithmic approaches that you have for doing credit checking, or for establishing new sales relationships, things of that nature. So there's a constant tug of war, if you will, with regard to establishing a higher degree of transparency in light of the necessity to keep certain things opaque, if you will, for competitive reasons in any given entity, usually in a for-profit entity.
Yeah, I know you do quite a bit of the same types of consulting that we do as well. Now, where do you advise your clients to start? Stephen and I are often on the tail end of a sales call, and the client says, hey, I need to go demonstrate trust or earn trust from a large entity, but how do you advise the clients to get started proactively?
I think to get started proactively, it takes a few things, but not overly complicated. So 3 come to mind. Know your consumer. So if you're coming to me and I'm being asked to vet a product, I'm going to ask you for your moment in time accreditation. So I'm going to ask you if you're SOC accredited. I'm going to ask you what other areas and what other accreditations your company has, because that's one part of it. The second part of it is making it very transparently clear on what problem you're aiming to solve for me. What assumptions have you made? What public data might you have that could help me inform what type of common language I need to develop with you, and if it needs to be covered under NDA, right? Because some of the problems we're aiming to solve are sensitive in nature. And to your point, as we come out of those conversations, right, we need to have narratives that make sense and that aren't ambiguous or opaque by design, right? But with intention, so that, okay, it's clear why this is behaving the way it does and why it was designed the way it was, right? That's missing. That's a critical gap. I feel a lot of vendors do come to me and it's almost like a spray and pray approach, right? They do a little bit of research for who I'm working for now and even in the past. And we're like, hey, we're here to aim, we want to solve AI for you. We want to solve third-party risk management for you. And I'm like, okay, in what capacity, right? So define the common language, define the problem. Don't overly simplify. Have the actual conversation, and then take that back to leadership in some capacity to say, okay, what aspects of this need to be covered under NDA, what don't, and do we trust, right? What internal vetting processes do we have for this person that's coming to us, or this person that we're interested in, right? This product, this service, because sometimes it's an aggregate, right? We'll bring them in to provide a service, but then they have products that we can also consider. Microsoft comes to mind, Steve. So, and I'll agree, it's highly disruptive when you have these contracts in place, these clauses in place for AI use, lines of delineation, and then features are made open to the public without my rep coming to me to let me know this functionality went live. I do agree to a certain aspect, depending on who you are, that could be a little bit of a breach of trust. Not the intention, agree, but then there needs to be some form of accountability on the back end, right, to reinforce that trust model. It's not a one size fits all. And I think that's kind of speaks to the complexity of the issue at play, which is it's no longer, even in the job market, it's no longer take me at face value. Scott, vouched for me. I'll be a great employee. It's a lot of show your work consistently. So it's not come to me, wine and dine me, get me to sign up for your product suite, right? And then we get into contract negotiations and it's a bait and switch. That has to, we are in the era here in 2025 where that needs to change. And we do need to know. And maybe it is a simple email saying, hey, on this date, this feature is going to go live. What say you? What considerations do we need to have ahead of that so that we don't jeopardize your enterprise security, right? We had the same, we had 30 days of reaction time to close out where Copilot was accessible because, Steve, it wasn't just an Outlook. It was across every single Microsoft tool in the suite, no notice. And if there was notice, let's just say somebody was informed. It didn't make it down to where I sit. It didn't make it down to where management sits. And I'm sure I'm not the one organization that experienced that. So common language, be very clear on the problems we're trying to solve, insulate what is sensitive, but then come together with something that logically makes sense that you can tell to external stakeholders, investors, what have you, to justify the business decision to move forward with a specific service, product, or aggregate to benefit your company and your organization.
Those thoughts, I mean, all of us, this is what we live every day. And hopefully our audience is also walking the same path with us. But Bill, I know you have no opinions on this at all. You live in financial services, and everything's free love. It's trust is giving, blindly there. But you also make a point that to earn trust and keep it, it isn't just about everything we've talked about building up to this, but it's also about storytelling. That was a point you've made a few times in our own personal conversations. Can you say a few words about that?
Yeah, by all means. There's three threads that I wanted to pull out of what both Nia and Steve said. First was around that SOC 2. I also read SOC 2s and I get them in and I get excited when I get a SOC 2. And then I open it up and I see the title and I get a little eyebrow raised when I see who is doing the SOC 2. I'm like, okay, I have to be cautious on this one. Then I immediately go down to that second paragraph to see, okay, which trust principles were hit? Oh, just security?
Only security.
Really? In this
Only
day and
the
age?
basics.
So as soon as I see that, my trust immediately goes down as a reader of this. So as I look towards the security leaders, and again, to understand what I do, my role as operating partner, we have over 30 different portfolio companies inside of our organization. So I work with each one of these security leaders, whether they are a CISO or maybe a director of security, whatever the case is. But there is a minimum baseline that we go at. None of our SOC 2s have just security. We go with security, availability, confidentiality, and then taking a look at the type of processing that's there. I'm encouraging the process integrity so we can help tell our audience what it is that we're actually doing inside of that space. Fully disclosed privacy, adequate, not great. ISO 27701 is what I'd like to see in that space. But anyways, with that said, so SOC 2, that's how I start to think about it as I go forward. Some of those vendors that are doing these SOC 2 mills, when I wash my hands at the airport and then I wave my hand in front, I get a SOC 2 that comes out and I just kind of dry my hands and toss it away. That's I'm number one. Number
DRC
two,
humor, I love it.
I'm literally going to write SOC 2 at the next time I'm at the airport and then I'll put that vendor that I'm thinking of. I won't do that. I won't do that. I know these are recorded and posted out there and it'll be a bad day. Second thing is the trust center. We've gone a long way. I'm very happy seeing the trust centers out there. I think it's a great step for us to be able to articulate our posture as security leaders. We are all getting hit with DDoS every single day. And I'm not talking about these electronic distributed denial of service attacks. I'm talking about the client requests, the vendor requests, everything coming in at us as we have to respond to all those questionnaires, absolutely crushing us. If we can direct, just like a bullfighter, like a red cape, just go to our trust center, find out what's going there. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year with auditors taking a look at us. I don't think that your third-party person, with due respect, is actually going to uncover anything more than what someone else who we've paid to do this is going to uncover in that space. So let's raise the water for everybody in this area and start using trust centers appropriately in that space. And then finally, sitting on the board in audit committee, I work with my CISOs to be able to present up to our general partners and articulate their security posture. I also work with my general partners to be able to assess the caliber of the messenger who's giving that message inbound. A couple questions that I always recommend to get asked. Whenever you ask about what is your fish prone number, I want to make sure that my security leaders can articulate what the denominator is inside of this. So I've taught my GPs to say, well, that's great that your fish prone number is 5%. That's great. But what is that denominator? Is that the total amount of messages that you sent out? Well, guess what? More than half of them aren't even going to be touched or read. If you're looking at that actual click number to figure out, okay, who's actually opened it and decided, do I take a good action, bad action, or no action? That's really where the denominator should be. So let's have a different conversation in there. Second thing that I have them ask is around what is the boundary? And I was so glad, Steve, that you talked about the boundary of that PCI space. That's one of the questions that I also have our leadership ask. If you're going to say, oh yeah, our environment's great, we're locked down, just say, great, as a security leader, walk me through the boundary that is green and what might be yellow or red, just to make sure that we have a full conversation on this. Because I think a lot of times in those 3 to 4 to 5 minutes that a security leader has inside of an audit committee or a board meeting, you might not get an opportunity to explain all that. I get this information in front of me, check, that looks good, I got to get to the next part of it. We got to slow down and make sure that we can ask those security leaders better questions. And the last two areas is just simply around privacy. Making sure that our security leaders understand that as we think about risk to the business, we also think about the risk to other data subjects and people across the board. How do we, as security leaders, balance in that space? And then finally, around growth, understanding how a security leader is helping to align his or her program to the growth of the organization. And that also tightly couples that relationship of trust, because now, am I going to put a security leader on a phone call for a sales prospect? Yeah, I do. I want to do that, but I'm only going to do that if I can trust that security leader. If I don't trust that security leader, I don't want you anywhere near my clients or prospects.
It's so much more complex than most people think when they even hire their first CISO and they say, can you edit ACLs on firewalls? Right. And we're hopefully now getting to the era of, oh, well, can you run the internal audits? Do you even know what the 3 lines of defense are that IA, preaches all the time? And which of those is the audit function? This CISO role needs to understand all of that, but work it aligned to the business. Have high integrity, but work it aligned to the business, because the trust will eventually arrive on their doorstep when they get grilled by the big third parties. Even for those of us that have the ISO certs and the SOC 2 assertions, What I really want to do, though, is to take the comment about scope that both Stephen and Bill have talked about. I want to reduce our conversation down to IA systems. Of course, even that scope is still enormous because we're using it for just about everything at this
Not
point.
a small diameter, Scott.
So, Stephen, I want to ask you to queue up our, the just one slide from the context in the AI. We did this like 6 months ago. We did a session, you led a session, panel like this on AI. I don't want to redo that whole thing, but if you could launch us into that space. I'm skipping over the third-party risk management because we've touched on that a lot already. Let me just share one page for context setting. And Stephen, when you're ready, let me know if you've got that material queued up. But this is essentially the part of the conversation where I wanted to open the box on responsible use of AI. And the reason why I picked it is not just because it's on everybody's mind every minute of every day, but it's because it exemplifies the fact that in every one of these supply chains, we are both the provider and the consumer of AI technology. We have both the responsibility, but also we ourselves are accountable for any damage that gets done to individuals. Now, it's kind of on the privacy vent. But anyway, let's open that box and let's talk about it. We can talk about things like ISO 42001 as one potential framework that brings governance to the picture. But I have to be totally honest, and I wear the CAIO hat in a couple of companies now, more than a couple. Governance is not a word many people put together with AI. Let me shut up and ask Stephen to take the wheel here. Stephen, can you share that if you're ready? And just show how we start to dig into this when we're advising as the stand-in CAIO.
All right, how are we doing? You getting the push?
There we go. It's visible now.
So let me just inflate this. This is not about the CIO manifesto. This is about the transparency of IA, and in particular, I'm going to float around the diagram. Forget about the details of the diagram. It's just scaffolding for the conversation. But to sort of prompt the discussion, you'll notice the title float overs here for each one of them. So at the strategic level, what identities are being used by these LLMs or the agents and the MCP, Model Context Protocol tools, as part of the business process? What identities? And why is that strategic? Well, you just assume it's ChatGPT and it's all third party and off-prem. That's not the case. I'll show a diagram in a little bit, but Scott, you just had on the graphic this one, when you're designing AI into business systems, what computation activities are being performed by the LLMs? So case in point, accounting information systems. In the US, there's north of 40 different ways to depreciate assets. Yeah, and it's all done with if-then else statements if you look inside of SAP or Oracle Financials or all the way down here in QuickBooks. If you apply AI to this, and this comes back to your point about performing actions repeatedly. If you apply AI to make the decision of which of the 40 plus depreciation methods, they're all just straight linear algebra, but which one of those equations gets applied, you're not guaranteed you're going to get the same answer from the same LLM if you go back with the exact same data. That's not a guarantee. So be transparent about it. A couple things that Scott and I would frequently run into, you're continuously training these things. Are the prompts being used for future training? Why did I bring that one up? A week or two ago, Anthropic just said, hey, by the way, we're going to use your prompts for future training for the Anthropic large language models. Now you can opt out of it, but just a heads up. At least they were transparent and told us, but most people use Anthropic's code to do software development. I'm putting in code and asking for that code to be enhanced. And my employer is going to say, no, you're not. You're not putting our code into a third-party system that's off-prem that now claims that they're going to be able to use that for future training. You are not doing that. Another one, development and deploying systems. Where are the LLMs geographically located from a data sovereignty perspective? I'm pumping in information in the form of prompts or pictures or documents, RAG, retrieval augmented generation. So maybe a business plan, maybe a floor plan for a building we're building. Where does that data go if this is an off-prem third-party solution? I need to know that. I need full transparency because I have to abide by, not the least of which, GDPR and all of its cousins around the world. And another one, verification and validation of AI systems. How does the agentic AI and its use of RAG affect the processing integrity? If at runtime, the user can insert various different documents, especially documents that are inside the corporate firewall. And once again, maybe this technology is running outside the corporate firewall. I need full transparency on all of that. And what complicates the issue is that most people, this picture does not exist outside of what you're looking at right now. This concept, I'm not going to brief it in depth, but left-hand side, training of the models. Right-hand side, use, inferencing of those models. And to Scott's point, there's producers and consumers. Sometimes it's the same organization, but in AI, not always. A lot of those LLMs are being trained off-prem, outside of your corporate firewall. And sometimes the inferencing is running, although today more and more of the inferencing is running on-prem, edge AI, inside the firewall or inside the cloud footprint that the organization itself manages. So, like I said, I'm not going to go into details about this, but I do want to point out one particular challenging one. About 6+ months ago, one of the Disney designers was using a graphic design tool. It's actually for producing imagery, to be very specific, called Comfy UI. Comfy UI has the ability to tailor the workflow on the client side, and each of the boxes in the workflow can be a plugin. And the plugins come from these, sort of public and private locations. This kid unknowingly downloaded a nefarious plugin into a Comfy UI workflow. The plugin was a keylogger on his personal system. Okay, not a Disney system, but he used OnePass. It picked up on his one-factor authentication to go get passwords in OnePass, breached the, accessed his OnePass list, and now could get into Disney, broke into Disney, and then, and by the way, used multi-factor, broke into Disney, and then exfilled millions of entries from one of the Slack channels from Disney. And the kid got fired. Okay, so the failures are multiple, but my get off the slide version of this one is companies down to the CISOs do not have the lay of the land. They're not up on the vernacular of all the variations, and it's going to change come Monday morning. This is a very rapid learning curve. You're on your heels nonstop. Full transparency is mandatory. It is not an option.
Thanks for feeding us the elephant, Stephen. Yes. If you can drop the sharing so that we get all of us back on the screen again.
Done.
So I think that's just one example of just how complex AI systems are, and that the transparency isn't just about the tech, it's about what is this thing doing for you? To Stephen's point, is it depreciation of assets? And what is your expectation in using either internally or externally an AI-based component to perform that function? It's the transparency, but it's also the reliability and the consistency that comes out of it. That's just one example to try, or one data point to try and illustrate the fact that our world has expanded by at least 1 or 2 orders of magnitude. But Nia, I know that was quite a bit to consume as Stephen was doing it. And the last time he did this, he had a whole hour-long session to talk about it. But your thoughts as you engage with businesses that are wrestling with AI. They've got to get to market. They've got to leverage AI. It's a competitive differentiator. It could be not just their efficiency, but their effectiveness, but governance in general. And to Stephen's point, are people even able to get their arms around this today because of the pace and the complexity that's involved?
Well, based on the elephant that Steve just walked us through, I would agree that there is a clear challenge and opportunity in front of us. Going back like a little over a year ago now, I was sitting down with a mentor here in Charlotte, and I was asked kind of almost a similar question, right? How, from a governance perspective, how are we wrapping our arms around all of this? And since that conversation, I advise simply and not overly simple either. Like it's just head on nail. So at the end of the day, when we're talking about LLMs and we're talking about AI, we're talking about data. And this ties in to your whole concept, Scott, about data sprawl, right? My favorite panel that I've probably done this year because it gives a name to what I've been trying to describe for a very long time. So what are our data governance practices, processes, and where's the policy? Because at the end of the day, I don't think Disney was wrong in letting that individual go. However, if we go up the chain and we look at it more from the lens of like New York and NYDFS, I get it, not a financial institution, cool, that's fine. There are other failure points other than that one engineer from the bottom to the top. And I'm not saying that they all need to be fired. That's not Mia's opinion. But my opinion is that from the top to the bottom, there are points of accountability that should be defined in those policies and practice as it relates to data security, data protection, right? At a minimum, before we can even attempt to try and define process and policy around LLM usage, AI left right limits, right? Scalability, feasibility. I'm asked all the time, like, what do you think about integrating this type of AI bot to help this process? I always go back to, and I'm sure a lot of people in my peer spaces are sick of me saying it. I'm like, where's the procedure? Where's the policy? Because if we're going to add that layer of complexity, you're increasing sprawl and you're increasing unintended misuse, right? By default, which actually increases insider risk, not insider threat, but insider risk because it's unintended. We're human. There are flaws. Well, it's an LLM. It is flawed. So if we're unclear and we're gray and we're nebulous on our policies and practices around data protection, data privacy, data security, far be it for me to say, hey, we need an AI policy, but we should probably be really thinking in that direction because if we think about it from a top-down approach, it would almost be like an umbrella where aspects of those data disciplines would tuck into as a core to build from. But if your company or your organization doesn't even have that defined clearly, repeatedly, and can stand audit, like and pass audit or any type of regulatory check, then I think we have some housekeeping to do, right? Would I advise. But it all starts with your data disciplines, in my opinion, and that repetitive action of actually doing what is in place.
I have a friend who actually works for me on one of my security teams, and he refers to what you just talked about as return to first principles. Right?
Mm.
Don't be blinded by the tech. Don't treat it like it's magical or mystical, whatever, but return to first principles. If you don't have the first principles and you're trying to jump to the 25th rung on the ladder, that's probably the first mistake you're making. But financial services space, right? Not highly regulated, right? Don't have too many spotlights shining into the corners that Nia's talking about here. What are you seeing right now in terms of expectations, internally, but maybe also externally from the regulators? What are you seeing in terms of this demand for visibility and consistency in the integrity of the organization's behaviors?
Right. So there's a bunch of things coming out of this piece. I will try to be as succinct as possible. I'm going to go back to old school principles of administrative controls and technical controls. Fully disclosed, I do not advocate for an AI policy. I am not an AI policy guy. You need to be able to put your AI policy into 4 key areas. One is your acceptable use. What is the acceptable use for the technology inside of your organization? Second one is around your data handling. What are you doing with the data handling? Do you have production data that has access to any type of an LLM? Is it close to it? Are your people trained properly in that area? Third area is around your messaging and collaboration. What are the tools that are going to be able to be used, and how are they going to be able to be used on your network? And then one of the most important ones in this area is around your third-party risk. And how are you assessing that third-party risk as it relates to some of these AI tools? Is it going through an AI committee to approve certain spend? We know that procurement is absolutely wrestling with how do we get our arms around all of the AI sprawl just in spend, let alone the security folks who are focused on the different technologies that are here, let alone then once you let them in the front door, as we saw with Microsoft, then what are they actually going to do in those areas? That brings us into those technical control pieces. So as you look at the technical controls, what are the wrappers that we're able to put around those administrative controls that I mentioned earlier on the policy side? So taking a look at where these LLMs are coming into play. Do you have any type of a technical governance piece? We've been testing out a couple different organizations. Full disclosure, please do not use this as an endorsement from Bill. We have not purchased a license in any of these areas just yet, but we are looking at companies like Harmonic. Can they help us in this space when it comes to DLP in that space? Looking at companies like Symmetry, helping us understand that intersection of identity and data like a DLP, but also as it relates into LLMs in this space. And then finally, looking at prompt injections to try to help us understand those solutions that are facing our customers. How are we protecting ourselves at that place for chatbots and other types of efficiencies in that space? So those are the areas that I'm looking at and that I'm helping my portfolio companies assess as well. And really does mean going back to basics and doing those things that we've been trained on since we were infants in the security space.
That unfortunately not enough people in the space get the return to those basics, the return to the principles. So I'm watching that we're getting closer to the top of the hour, and at the top of the hour, I need to return to being audited. It's a 27701 session I need to dive back into, but let me share just kind of a get off the stage slide and summarize, but I want to solicit just like a 60-second summary from each of you guys as we go around the room here. Generally speaking, I would say that trust isn't just about the transparency. Nia, you probably put it better than all of us. It's about the competency and the consistency. It's your behavior. It isn't a once and done. This is, you need to maintain it. And Bill talked about it as well. You know, when I look at the SOC 2s, I'm the same way. If it's just a security SOC 2, then this is absolutely bare minimum. I want to see processing integrity because that is about the continuity, right? And a SOC 2 is a look back over ideally 12 months, but the processing integrity is where you really have to open the envelope and talk about what are we actually doing with the data that Nia talked about? What are we doing in terms of the vendors? And Stephen talked about this as well. What are we doing ourselves to add value? I love saying AI isn't new. We've always had actual intelligence, and some of us have always had artificial intelligence. By the way, in our family, mine is the actual, Stevens is the artificial, but we've always had it.
That is why we call Scott 1.0.
Let me start with, then, Stephen, 60 seconds on your thoughts about transparency in general. You can use the AI example if you want to constrain it, or just talk more generally, but we spend a lot of time helping our clients gain the trust of their stakeholders. You're just, 60 seconds, get off the stage, maybe advice to our audience.
So I would dip down into the well for corporations that have filed for patents. There is the transparency dance in every patent application. How much can you disclose through necessity and law without fully disclosing all of your competitive information, if you will? This is derivative of that, I would suggest. It's not saying they're functionally equivalent, but it's not unlike walking that path, which has been done for 60 years, 70 years now for many of the corporations that each of us work with. So it's not entirely a new forest. We've seen some of the trees before. Yes, there's the balancing act between how much can you give away. As a CISSP, My principal concern is actually giving away the actual technical footprint. I'm all for software bill of materials, all for it. But the last thing I want disclosed to the nation state adversary is my software bill of materials, because that just gave them the roadmap for how to go attack my entity, my organization. That it just lays bare every vulnerability, because now they have the complete software bill of material from that perspective. So one thing I like about SOC 2s, treat them as confidential, only release them underneath non-disclosure agreements. I'm all for that. I don't think that one needs to completely go open kimono, shall I say, with the trust center for the corporation, but at least show a corporate commitment. Nia, I think you mentioned it at the start of the meeting. How are the executives showing up? Is this an authentic commitment to transparency? And then point out, we're not going to go further than this, because doing so is going to be, detrimental to our cyber profile, to our the protection of our competitive assets. So do what you can and be deliberate and authentic about the transparency.
Bill, 60 seconds from you, advice to our audience.
Sure. When you take a look at the timeline of where we are, think about when you go to a mall and you say that you are here. Think about where we are. We're out of the dark ages. I think we're past the golden age of being a security leader. We are now in a post-AI, pre-quantum area. Right now in this area, we have to be able to make sure we have our foundational pieces, and we have to be situationally aware about what's going on all around us. The things that we chatted about today, don't let them die here. Have a conversation with your peers. Engage your other security leaders, your mentors, your mentees. I love that Nia talked about mentorship. That is something that our industry, it's absolutely crucial that we do. Find somebody who you want to talk to so you can learn more about these things. If you don't know some of these terms, there's a lot of acronyms in this area. Raise your hand. Make sure you can ask and see what's going on. Because this next level that we're going to go into in this post-AI, post-quantum world, and we look over that edge of the Rubicon, it's going to be crazy.
And Nia, I literally saved the best for last, because you talk a lot in a future-looking perspective. Where are we headed? Bill just led that a bit, but where is all of this headed? Where is trust headed over the course of, say, even just the next 5 years as we reach to 2030? What are your thoughts in terms of what do we need to prepare for?
Like I said, ample opportunity there, Scott. We're rounding second base, right? And just imagine a world where quantum's behind everything we touch. So now we're actually talking AI, right? And the manifestation of that. What would you want to know? What questions in data would you want transparent to you as a leader in order to make informed decisions? Lead with curiosity. Right. So if you have a team member that's coming to you with an observation, don't be so quick to shut it down. Have just open, curious conversations so that we could start thinking critically together, because that's what it's going to take. It's no longer Nia's long-term vision for this one solution is going to work at scale. It's going to take collaborative points of view and an aggregate tailored fit solution in a lot of cases that is proprietary to companies in order to be able to embrace what AI plus quantum equals for us in the future. So it's not an individual contributor sport anymore. And I'm actually really excited for that. But I do want everyone listening to reflect, what does trust mean to you? And what would you need today in order to improve trust within your organization so that we can get prepared together?
Fantastic. And guys, you've given us so much to think about. It's huge. Trust me in the CISO. I love it.
Put that on the backs of all of your computers right there, Bill.
Okay, guys.
I want to say thank you to everybody. I really appreciate the perspectives. I think we've given our audience a lot to think about, but most importantly, I think we've made the point loud and clear. There are no simple answers to such complex questions. Trust is a very difficult thing to build and hold on to. Mike, let me send it back to you so we can wrap up.
Yeah, well, thank you, Scott, and thank you, Nia, Steve, and Bill. That was a great session. We did record the session for those of you who might want to share it with your teammates. We will get the recording to you. And for those of you who wish to get CPEs, please get me your number and I'll make sure we take care of that. If you're interested in talking to any of the panelists, let me know and I can facilitate an introduction, or feel free to reach out directly to them on LinkedIn. And I hope you enjoyed our roundtable series this year. Due to its popularity, we do plan to come back next year. So thank you all for joining us throughout the year, and enjoy the remainder of the day. And that concludes the briefing. Thank you.
Thanks again, everybody. Panelists, you guys were great. Stay safe, everybody. I got to go to my audit.
Bye all.
Later.
Bye, everybody.